In this video, we're going to be taking a look at some crime scene mistakes that changed cases forever. So first up, we have the case of Ramsey. This is the case of a 7-year-old girl who was found dead in her family home in Boulder, Colorado on December 26, 1996. This was a huge breakthrough for the case, and it gave investigators hope that they could finally catch the person responsible for death. But after all this time, where were these DNA samples from under her fingernails? Well, it turns out that the reason why the DNA was never tested sooner was because of a series of major blunders made by the investigators at the scene. The driver, who was later identified as Gary, was speeding and driving under the influence when he crashed into the bus. He was taken to the hospital with serious injuries but survived the crash. However, he was charged with several crimes, including driving under the influence and vehicular manslaughter. During his trial, Gary's blood samples showed that he had a blood alcohol level of 0.13, which is above the legal limit of 0.08. Gary claimed that he had only had 2 beers before the accident, but the prosecutor argued that if he had only had 2 beers, his blood alcohol level would not be so high. Gary was convicted of all charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. First of all, the family and friends were allowed into the crime scene before the police had completed their work and admitted that he had switched the blood samples. He had swapped Gary's blood with his own, which had a lower alcohol content. This meant that Gary's blood sample was actually from a different person entirely. This meant that Gary had been wrongly convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Unfortunately, by this time, Gary had already served for years of his sentence and was not eligible for parole. He spent a total of 8 years in prison before his conviction was overturned. This meant that the body was contaminated and any evidence that could have been collected was lost. To make matters worse, the body was moved from the basement to the dining room before investigators had finished searching the area. This meant that the killer could have easily disposed of any evidence that was left behind. As a result of these mistakes, the police were unable to collect any meaningful evidence from the crime scene, and the case went cold. She had been reported missing from her home 3 days earlier on Christmas Day. After an extensive nationwide search, her body was found in the basement of the family home. Although the police suspected that the father, John Ramsey, had killed his daughter, they didn't have enough evidence to charge him, and so the case went cold. However, in 2008, new DNA testing revealed that the killer had left some skin cells under one of her fingernails. Now, in most cases like this one, the evidence is lost forever, but in some cases, there are still ways to recover the evidence. In the case of Ramsey, for example, the skin cells that were found under her fingernails could have been recovered through a process called forensic genealogy. This is a new technique that uses DNA samples to build a family tree and identify potential relatives of the victim or the perpetrator. However, this technique was not available in 1996 when the case took place. So do you think that this case will ever be solved? Let me know your thoughts down below. Moving on, we have another case where a drunk driver crashed into a school bus full of children. But here's the thing, after the trial, Gary's brother, who was also his best man at his wedding, came forward. So that is some crime scene mistakes that changed cases forever. Do you know of any more? Let me know in the comments below.